The Iron Throne had never been made for comfort, and on that day it seemed to Eddard Stark that it had been made for truth even less. Under the cushions, men had piled upon its blades for him. Hidden points still found his flesh, as if the chair knew the difference between a ruler and a man only borrowing rule. His leg throbbed where Jaime's steel and horseflesh had ruined it. Sweat dried cold beneath his doublet. The hall below smelled of dust, horse, tallow, and the faint copper stink of old blood carried in from the Riverlands. Sir Carol Vance stood at the foot of the throne with smoke in his cloak and fury in his face. Beside him, Sir Mark Piper had a strip of linen tied around one hand so tightly that the knuckles showed white through the cloth. Men from the Trident had a particular look when war was coming for them. The look of farmers who had seen the sky turn the wrong color. "Say it again," Ned told them, because saying it once had not made it less ugly. Sir Carol looked up through red-rimmed eyes. "They came with no banners, my lord. Villages burned in the night. Small folk hanged from trees. Girls taken. Children put to the torch. We chased them to the Mummers Ford and found one they left behind with his face hacked half away. He named Sir Gregor before he died. No need." A mutter moved through the hall like a draft under a door. Gregor Clegane's name had that weight. Even men who had never seen the mountain knew the stories. Sir Mark stepped forward on a boot crusted with mud. These were no outlaws. They were armored men, mounted, provisioned, led. "Lord Tywin tests you, my lord. He means to answer Lady Catelyn's taking of his son with steel and fire." "No, got..." Ned's hand tightened on the arm of the throne. Lady Catelyn. His wife had ridden from King's Landing in secret and found trouble all the same. Tyrion Lannister in a sky cell at the Eyrie. Gregor burning the Riverlands. Jaime gone west after the attack in the street. And the king away hunting, drinking, laughing with men who feared him less than they once had. The realm was splitting in his hands like rotten wood. Below him, Lord Renly shifted in his bright green velvet and looked almost bored, though Ned had seen enough of the younger Baratheon to know that his boredom was another kind of wariness. Petyr Baelish wore a smile so slight it seemed painted in the corner of his mouth. Varys' soft hands folded into his sleeves like white spiders disappearing into silk. Grand Maester Pycelle bowed his ancient head and sighed as if grief itself had grown a beard. Ned rose as much as the leg would allow. The pain made the hall sharpen, every color edged with iron. "In the name of Robert of House Baratheon, first of his name, King of the Andals and the Rhoynar, and the First Men," he said, and his voice carried farther than he expected. "I strip Sir Gregor Clegane of all rank and title, sentence him to death, and command that sentence carried out. Lord Tywin Lannister is summoned to court to answer for the crimes of his ben." This time the murmur broke open. Renly's brows climbed. Littlefinger's smile widened. Pycelle made a noise deep in his throat, half protest and half cough. Varys watched as if he were listening to a song only he could hear. Ned went on before any of them could speak. "Sir Beric Dondarrion will ride with a royal command to bring the king's justice to Sir Gregor. Thoros of Myr will go with him. So will men I trust." He looked down at the two riverlords. "Take heart. The crown has heard you." They knelt, both of them, and whatever else might be said of southern men, their gratitude did not look feigned. By the time the hall emptied, the ache in Ned's leg had reached his hip and lower back. He descended the throne by inches, each careful step a humiliation before men who measured strength in what could be done without flinching. Renly came close enough to offer an arm. Ned took it for the steps and no farther. "You make enemies with a kingly hand, Stark," Renly said lightly. "Better enemies in the open than friends who wait in shadows," Ned answered. Littlefinger heard and laughed under his breath. "Then you are in the wrong city, my lord." Ned gave him nothing, not even a glance. The city had been wrong from the day he entered it. Too many doors, too many whispers, too many soft-footed men who smiled when others died. He wanted sky, stone, wolfwood, and the clean edge of winter. Instead, he had been given the south, and the south rotted prettily. He sent the others away and went to the Godswood with only Tomard at his side until the gate. There he dismissed even him. The Godswood of the Red Keep was no true forest like the one at Winterfell. It was a little thing, neat and southern, ringed with old walls and tamed paths. Yet the heart tree had been brought from the north long before Aegon's dragons, and its face still watched with that old carved sorrow. The red leaves whispered overhead as if blood could learn the language of wind. Cersei Lannister stood beneath it in green silk embroidered with gold vines. She had dressed as though for a feast, not a reckoning. Her hair was bright as forged metal, bound up in braids that caught the light. No crown on her head, yet she wore certainty like one. "You asked for me," she said. "I did, and here I am, alone as you wished. A kindness I do not often show men who threaten my children." "No." Ned looked at her for a long moment. He had once thought her beautiful in the cold, distant way of sculpture, all clean line and costly perfection. Now he saw only polish over cruelty, pride over fear. Jon Arryn had died for learning what she had done. So might many others before this was ended. "I know," he said. She did not blink. "Do you? About the children? About Jaime?" At that she smiled, though it was the smile of a woman measuring the distance to a knife. "If you know, why are you here and not with your king?" "He is my king. That is why I am here." A crow called from beyond the wall. The sound struck across the small wood like a stone skipped over black water. "He is hunting," Cersei said. "He has spent half his reign hunting one thing or another. Boars, stags, wine, women, old victories. What you mean is that when Robert returns, you intend to tell him?" "Yes." She turned away from him and reached out to touch one of the hanging red leaves with the tip of a finger. "Then you are slower than I thought." Ned's anger sharpened. "Jon Arryn is dead because he learned the truth. Others have died for less. No more." She looked back over her shoulder. "No more. Such northern words. They sound very grand in a city of swords." "There are children in this," he said. "Whatever you and Jaime have done, they did not choose it. Yield them into my protection when the king returns. Let there be no blood in the Red Keep." "Your protection. I would see them spared." She laughed then, low and incredulous. "Spared by Robert? Spared by Stannis if he learns? Spared by every lord in Westeros who sees a bastard in silk and thinks himself pious for putting a head on a spike?" She took a step closer. "You mistake yourself, Lord Stark. Mercy is not what rules here. It is not what ever ruled here. Your king won his crown with a hammer. My father keeps his lands with fear. Your sweet old Jon Arryn held this city together with marriages and lies. And you come to me with mercy." Ned held her gaze. "Yield and I will send you west with the children before sunset." "Send me." Her voice went flat. "You talk as though you command armies already." "I command enough." She came close enough for him to smell her perfume under the leaves. Something floral and sharp that failed to hide the heat of her skin. "Do you? You have a broken leg, a dead hand's empty chambers, a handful of Northmen, and a daughter betrothed to my son. Jaime has men in the west. My father has armies. The gold cloaks take gold from many hands and ask no questions. My cousin stands at the king's elbow with strong wine whenever he asks for it. You think you can frighten me because you found a black-haired bastard in a smithy. No, no. Ned's face hardened. You have until Robert returns. She studied him, and for the first time he saw naked contempt in her. When men think honor makes them dangerous, they become predictable. That is your weakness. You would rather break than bend, and you imagine everyone else built of the same brittle wood. I imagine you capable of murder. That is because you are not a fool. Her smile returned, thin as a blade. But you are late. Before he could answer, horns sounded from beyond the Godswood walls. Not the tidy horn of ceremony. A ragged blare, then another. Shouting followed, boot thunder, the clatter of hooves on stone. A woman screaming for someone to move aside. Cersei's head turned at once. Ned's heart sank before he knew why. They left the trees almost together, though she outran him easily on the path and did not look back. By the time he emerged into the yard, men were swarming like ants over spilled honey. A horse lay on its side, froth at the mouth. One of the king's hunting dogs had blood on its snout, and whined as if bewildered by the smell of too much death. Near the gate, a boar bigger than a pony had been thrown down atop a cart, its coarse hide bristling, one tusk broken and black with drying gore. King Robert Baratheon was being carried in on a litter, and the linen at his middle had gone red all through. Lancel Lannister stumbled beside him white-faced, one hand slick to the wrist. Sir Barristan Selmy strode on the other side with his jaw set like stone. Renly was already there, shouting for room, for Pycelle, for everyone and no one. Joffrey stood beneath the arch with his mouth open in wonder. Sansa was there too, a hand to her throat, Septim Ordain gripping her shoulder. Arya had climbed a barrel for a better view and looked not frightened but intent. Robert's eyes found Ned through the confusion. They were bright with pain and wine and something like disbelief. "The brute got me," he said, and then laughed or tried to until blood touched his teeth. Ned moved toward the litter as quickly as the leg allowed, and the whole bright, perfumed, poisonous castle seemed to tilt into a new shape around him. The day had begun with justice carried out in the king's name. It ended with the king carried in half dead, the queen dry-eyed, the realm already choosing sides beneath its polished face. The smell in the king's bedchamber was wrong for life. Vinegar, blood, wine, hot linen, open bowels, crushed herbs, the sweet, sick odor of flesh already beginning to lose its argument with death. Servants moved with terrified silence. Even the rushes seemed to hold their breath. Grand Maester Pycelle had stripped Robert to the waist and packed the torn belly with steaming cloths that darkened by the moment. The great chest that had once seemed able to laugh at a battlefield rose and fell in shallow labor. Sweat soaked the king's beard to darker brown. He looked larger in bed than most men looked on horseback, and more helpless for it. "Out," Robert growled when Cersei came near enough for him to see her clearly. "I'll not have that face over me now." For a heartbeat, every soul in the room froze. Cersei's expression did not change, yet the silence tightened. Ned saw the fury gather in her eyes and vanish again behind queenly composure. "As you command," she said. She withdrew with the children trailing silk and cold. Joffrey resisted until Sandor Clegane's hand came down on his shoulder and guided him out as if he weighed nothing. Tommen looked as if he might cry. Myrcella already was, though quietly. Lancel went with them after Pycelle ordered his hands washed and the king's hunting cloak burned. When the door shut, Robert closed his eyes. "I'd forgotten," he muttered, "how much a man can hate with half his guts out." Ned stood by the bed. He had sent for Renly, Barristan, and Varys before even climbing the stairs. Littlefinger had come without sending and hovered now by the shutters with his fingers resting on the pommel of his dagger, as though it were a friend. The king was not yet dead, and already the room had filled with men who listened for the shape of the next rain. Pycelle fussed over the poultices, muttering that the wound had torn deep, that the king had lost too much blood, that rest was needed. Milk of the poppy perhaps, perhaps not. Robert shoved at him weakly. "No poppy. I'll not sleep through my own dying." He opened his eyes and found Ned. Some old rough affection surfaced there through the pain. "You look worse than I do, Stark. I've had more practice at standing." That won a breath of laughter. It ended in a wet cough. Renly turned his face away. Barristan did not move a muscle. Robert swallowed wine from a cup Pycelle tried and failed to hide from him. "The boar was white," he said. "Did they tell you? Big ugly brute. Had one eye. Looked like some curse from an old tale." He grimaced. "I got him too. Tell them that. Tell everyone. Don't let them say a pig beat me." "No one will say it and live," Renly said sharply. "Ha!" Robert licked blood from the corner of his mouth. "That's my brother. The pretty one anyway." He turned his head with effort. "Where's Stannis?" No one answered at once. Pycelle looked at the floor. Renly looked at the candles. Ned said, "On Dragonstone." Still sulking, Robert shut his eyes again. 7 hells. The man never loved laughter. His hand searched weakly over the coverlet until Ned took it. Robert gripped harder than seemed possible. "Listen to me. The realm. Gods. What a pack of grasping cunts they all are. You'll have to hold them. Then give me leave to do it clearly," Ned said. Robert's eyes narrowed a little. The paper. No. Banda. Pycelle brought writing things at once. Those hands trembled enough that the quills scratched against the tray before he managed it. Ned had prepared the sheet while the king drifted between waking and pain. Now he held it where Robert could see. "I have set down your wishes," he said. "Read it if you can." Robert snorted through his nose. "Can hardly see my own hand." He squinted anyway, lips moving over a few words before the effort wearied him. "Good enough. You wrote what I said?" "Ma, pandani." "I did." Ned had written it plainly. That Robert Baratheon named Eddard Stark Lord Protector of the Realm, to rule as regent until his son Joffrey came of age. The words lay there heavy as stones. He had thought, once, of changing them. If he had, the room might soon run red. If Robert died naming no clear protector, Cersei would seize the boy and the court both before dawn. With the parchment sealed and witnessed, Ned could at least take the realm in hand long enough to choose truth over chaos. He felt the lie and duty wrestling in him still, but he kept his face still as cold water. "Witness it," Robert said. Barristan came first, kneeling by the bed with his white cloak whispering over the floor. Whatever else the old knight had become in years of ceremony, he had not forgotten how to look at a king. Renly followed, less eager than Barristan, but shrewd enough to understand what was being asked of him. Pycelle bent over the writing. Varys drifted close. Littlefinger stayed where he was, watching as if this were a mummer's farce played for coin. Robert made his mark at the bottom with a hand that shook so badly Ned had to steady the wrist. The name came out jagged, more cut than written, but it was his hand. Pycelle pressed the king's seal into warm red wax. Barristan looked from seal to face and nodded once. "Sir Barristan," Robert said thickly. "You hear me? Ned is protector, till the boy's grown. You obey him as you'd obey me." Barristan bowed his white head. "With all my strength, your grace." Renly, his brother, came close. There was grief in him now, whatever else. "I hear. Don't make a face like that. I'm not wed to you." Robert's mouth twitched. "Stand with Ned. Gods know he'll need help. He's too honest for this nest." Renly gave one short breath that might almost have been a laugh. "That he is." Robert's gaze wandered again. "The girl," he said after a moment. Ned knew at once whom he meant. "Daenerys Targaryen still lives." "Good." The word left Robert with surprising force. "No child. I was wrong there." He stared past the bedposts toward nothing. "Killing children." His fingers loosened. "Rhaegar had one cost me a kingdom before he was born. The next might have cost me less than this. Still wrong." Ned said nothing. There was no mercy in telling a dying man that his mercy had come years too late for many others. "Lyanna," Robert murmured then. And that name still had power to stop Ned's breath. Wonder if she would have laughed at me. A bore. His lips twisted. I was never good enough for her, was I? The room seemed to draw away until there was only the bed and the old wound of that question. Ned thought of a tower in Dorne. Blue roses. Blood on a bed as cruelly as this one. Promises that had ruled his life more sternly than any king. He said the kindest thing he could. "She would have wanted you to be brave." Robert considered that as if it mattered. At last he gave a faint nod. "Then let it be said I was, even here." He looked at Ned with a sudden hard clarity. "Watch them. Joff, the girl, Tommen. Don't let Cersei turn the boy into..." His mouth worked. Pain took the thought from him before words could. "I will watch," Ned said. Robert sagged into the pillows. Pycelle moved at once with another draft, but the king waved him off. "No more. Not yet." Varys came closer on slippered feet. "Your Grace, should the city watch be instructed?" Robert's eyes barely opened. "By Ned. All by Ned." The effort cost him. "Out. All of you. Not you, Stark. The rest." One by one they withdrew. Barristan went last of the sworn men, and before the door shut behind him, he looked back once. Ned knew what that look meant. The old knight would hold to the king's words now, with every splinter of honor left in him. When the chamber had emptied, save for Ned and the soft breathing of the king, Robert spoke without opening his eyes. "Don't let them tear it apart." Ned bowed his head. "I'll do what I can." "Do better than that," Robert muttered. "You always did." The king slept then, or sank into something close enough that there was no waking him for a while. Ned stood over him with the sealed parchment in his hand and knew that his life had just narrowed to a blade's edge. On one side lay law, on the other truth, and beneath both ran the blood of children who had done no wrong but be born to the wrong bed. He tucked the will into his doublet, close to his heart, though it felt more like stone than parchment, and went out into the candlelit passage where the realm was already waiting to be told what shape its grief would take. The Tower of the Hand felt less like a refuge than a place where decisions went to harden. Fires had been lit against the night chill. The coals glowed low and red, as if the godswood had followed him indoors in another form. On the table lay maps, seals, blank parchment, cups gone cold with untouched wine, and the king's will in its fold of leather. Outside the windows, the city spread black and lantern-speckled to the river. From somewhere below came the iron clank of the portcullis being lowered and raised again. Renly arrived before Ned had finished his first letter. "I can put 100 men in Maegor's holdfast before dawn," he said without preamble. "A few more at the gates if Loras helps me. Once Robert dies, Cersei will move at once. She's already moving if she has any sense." "She has sense enough," Ned said. "Then take the children." Ned looked up from the parchment. "I'll not seize them like thieves in the night." Renly threw out a hand. "Not seize them. Secure them. Keep them from her. If Joffrey has breath to shout and Cersei has breath to whisper, you'll have a battle before breakfast. Your paper is good, but steel reads faster than ink." "Nah, they shall more." That was nearer the truth than Ned liked. He thought of Robert's order, of Barristan's solemn vow, of the Queen's certainty beneath the heart tree. "Not a scratch on them," he said at last. "No rough hands. Barristan will place sworn men around the royal apartments in the king's name. Your men can take the posterns, the bridges between the holds, and the inner yard. Quiet." Renly's mouth thinned. "Quietly wins less often than loudly, but more cleanly." Ned leaned back against Pain and rubbed at his temple. "Do it." Renly studied him as if deciding whether stubbornness and courage were the same thing in the end. Then he nodded. "Very well. Loras is eager enough to play at danger. He'll like the work." He turned to go, then paused. "And Littlefinger? What of him?" He came to me downstairs smiling as if the king were already in his grave. Smiles like that always cost someone. Ned almost said that in King's Landing all smiles cost someone. Instead, he told Renly to send Barristan and close the door behind him. Sir Barristan came armored despite the hour, his white cloak freshly arranged, the enamel on his breastplate catching the firelight. He listened without interrupting, then placed his hand over his heart. The king's words were plain. "I will obey." "I may ask more of you than watching doors," Ned said. "You may ask all." The old knight's face did not change. "Whether I can give all is for battle to decide. But what I have is yours, while it is the king's command." Men like Barristan were rare in the south. Rare anywhere, Ned supposed. Men so long obedient to crowns that obedience had become the shape of their souls. He wondered if that made them stronger or merely easier to wound. When Barristan had gone, Pettier Baelish slipped in as if summoned by the silence itself. He wore plum velvet and amusement. "You are industrious for a crippled wolf," he said. "Letters, maps, loyal brothers, white knights. It is almost enough to make me sentimental. It should make you useful." Littlefinger put a hand to his chest. "A kinder request from you than I expected." Ned did not invite him to sit. "The city watch must hear the king's will before the queen's men reach them with another tale. Lord Slint is vain, corrupt, and not brave enough to choose a losing side if you paint the odds for him clearly." Petyr laughed aloud. "You do know him." His bright cat's eyes narrowed a little. "And how do you mean to paint him? Coin has colors he understands. Promises too. Men like Janos prefer their futures counted. The crown will reward the man who keeps the peace in its hour of mourning." Littlefinger strolled to the table and picked up a seal, weighing it on his palm. "You speak of peace as though it were an income. It is not. Chaos is the better investment." Seeing Ned's face, he smiled more softly. "That was a jest. Half a jest." "Go to Slint," Ned said. "Tell him Barristan Selmy stands with the king's will. Tell him Renly Baratheon has men at the inner gates. Tell him Robert commanded all matters through me until Joffrey's majority. Tell him that a man who keeps the realm whole in such an hour might rise very high indeed. And if Cersei offers him higher," Ned's voice cooled further, "then let him remember that queens may promise what kings can take away." Petyr inclined his head. "As you wish." He was almost at the door when Ned said, "Do not play me false in this." Littlefinger glanced back over his shoulder. "My lord, I only ever play the board." When he had gone, the room seemed fouler for the perfume he left behind. Varys came next, though perhaps he had never been far. The eunuch's slippers made no sound. He folded himself into the chair Renly had abandoned and sighed like a man settling in to hear music. "You labor very hard to prevent bloodshed," he said. "Would you rather I welcomed it?" Varys lowered his eyes modestly. "I would rather my little birds did not have to wash blood from stone. It stains." "Then tell me what they hear. That the queen's women are burning papers in one hearth and writing new ones in another. That a Lannister guard has already ridden to the rookery twice. That the king's eldest son has asked whether he may wear a sword to his father's bedside, and whether swords are long enough to reach traitors from across a room. That your daughter Sansa has been weeping. That your daughter Arya has not." He laced his fingers. "And that the city is listening, as cities do. Cities are animals. They scent death before men speak of it." Ned closed his eyes briefly. "Can you stop the queen's letters?" Varys smiled sorrowfully. "Stop? Such a hard little word. Delay, divert, misplace, confuse perhaps. For a time. Not forever. A time may be enough. Sometimes." Varys rose. "Do not forget, my lord. The realm admires visible authority. Seals, witnesses, swords drawn in the open. If you hesitate once the king has breathed his last, others will not. They never do." After Varys left, Ned wrote until his hand cramped. To Stannis he wrote first, in plain language, and with all speed. The king lay dying. The will was sealed. "Come at once. Bring whatever proof Jon Arryn had gathered, if proof there was." To Winterfell, he wrote next, telling Robb only that grave matters held him in the south, that the north must remain steady, that winter and wolves both required patience. He wrote to Riverrun, to the Eyrie though he expected little from Lysa, to Storm's End, to Highgarden, to the High Septon. Each letter felt like casting a stone into black water and waiting to see what rose. At last, when the candles had burned low enough to gutter, he sent for his daughters. Sansa entered first in a pale sleeping gown with her hair loose around her shoulders, her face blotched from crying. She still looked so very young when sleep had rubbed the courtly polish from her. Arya came behind her barefoot, eyes bright in the firelight, brown hair a riot around her face. Needle was not on her belt, but Ned would have wagered she knew precisely where it lay. "Father," Sansa said at once, "how is the king?" "Dying," Ned answered. There was no gentler truth to offer. She covered her mouth. Tears sprang fresh. And Joffrey? Arya rolled her eyes before she could stop herself. Ned caught the movement and almost smiled despite everything. "Prince Joffrey is safe," he said. Sansa's next words came out as if they'd been waiting all along. "He should be with his father. He may be, when it is fitting. It is fitting now." Arya crossed her arms. "Maybe he just asked where the crown is." "Sansa," Ned kept his voice mild. "Listen to me well, both of you. Until I say otherwise, you will remain in the Tower of the Hand or in your own chambers with your guard. You will not go to the Queen's rooms. You will not send messages. You will not trust any summons that does not come by my hand." "Nay, Abba, Balbo." Sansa stared as if he had struck her. "Why would I need guarding from the Queen?" He did not answer that. Some truths could not be given to daughters like bread. Arya, however, nodded once, absorbing it all with unsettling calm. "Will there be fighting?" "Not if men keep their wits. That means there will be fighting," she said. Ned huffed out the ghost of a laugh. "Perhaps?" Sansa's lower lip trembled. "Father, please, Joffrey." "Enough," he said, more sharply than he intended. She flinched. He softened at once. "I mean, only to keep you safe." From the doorway, Syrio Forel bowed as lightly as a cat stepping over rainwater. He had come with Arya and lingered there now, his bald head bright in the lamplight, his eyes alert. "My Lord Hand," the Braavosi said, "the little lady sees much. So I have noticed." Ned looked from Arya to Syrio. "Keep her within call." Syrio put a hand over his heart. "As you say." When they had gone, the chamber felt emptier than before. Ned stood by the window listening to the towers and courts of the Red Keep murmur in the dark. Somewhere below, boots moved across stone in patterns new enough to be Renly's men taking station. Somewhere else, a woman laughed too loudly. Somewhere a raven beat at the bars of its cage. He touched the parchment inside his doublet and wished, with a weariness as deep as bone, that Robert had never ridden south to ask him for anything at all. Robert died in the hour before dawn, when candles were at their ugliest and men's courage at its weakest. The rain had started sometime in the darkest part of the night, a fine cold mist that slicked the windows and turned the city below into a smear of wavering lights. Ned had dozed in a chair outside the king's chamber with his leg propped and his hand on the leather fold that held the will. He woke to Pycelle's voice inside, urgent and hushed, and then to Robert's, suddenly loud in the way of the dying. Ned. He was at the bedside in 3 steps and a stab of pain. Robert's eyes were open and strangely clear. All the wine and fever had burned away. He looked old in that moment, and more kingly than he had in years. "It's cold," Robert said. Ned took his hand. The fire's lit. Robert barely seemed to hear. "Don't let them tear." The rest drifted off into a breath that never quite returned. For a long while, no one moved. The rain hissed softly against the panes. Then Pycelle laid trembling fingers to the king's throat and bowed his head. "His grace is gone." The words opened the world like an axe opens a log. Men began moving at once. Bells were ordered. White sheets were fetched. Messages ran through corridors like mice through grain. Renly swore low and vicious. Barristan went to one knee beside the bed and stayed there with his head bowed until Ned touched his shoulder. "There is work," Ned said. Barristan rose at once. By the time the first bell began to toll over the city, Cersei had already sent for the council. Ned expected it. He had been helped into a fresh black doublet and belted the king's will beneath it before he set out. Renly walked at his left, Barristan at his right. Behind them came Tamard and 2 other Stark guards, grim in mail, and farther back 2 of Renly's men in antlered helms. The Red Keep smelled of wet stone, funeral wax, and speed. Servants flattened themselves against walls. Lannister guards watched from doorways, hands near hilts. No one yet dared bar the way. The council chamber had been abandoned for the throne room by the time they reached it. Cersei had chosen spectacle, which meant she felt strong. The great hall glimmered with dawn turned red by the windows high above. The Iron Throne reared over it all like a judgment. Before the steps stood Cersei in black velvet edged with gold. Beside her, Joffrey wore mourning as though it insulted him. Tommen and Myrcella lingered close, pale and silent. Sandor Clegane stood behind the boy prince with one burned cheek in shadow. Pycelle was already there. So were Varys and Littlefinger, who seemed to find the hour amusing. At the wide bronze doors, Janos Slynt waited with 6 gold cloaks, his eyes sharp and small in a fleshy face. Cersei watched Ned approach and inclined her head the barest fraction. Lord Stark. We had begun to wonder whether grief had overcome duty. No, Arya. It has sharpened it, Ned replied. Joffrey took a step forward. My father is dead. I will have the crown. The boy's voice cracked slightly on the word will. He could not have known it made him sound younger. Ned drew out the parchment. You will have what your father left you. Cersei's gaze fixed on the seal. Then, let us hear it. He broke the wax where all could see and read in a voice that carried to the far walls. Know all men that I, Robert of House Baratheon, first of my name, King of the Andals and the Rhoynar and the First Men, do hereby name Eddard Stark, Lord of Winterfell and Warden of the North, Lord Protector of the Realm, to rule as regent until my son Joffrey comes of age. The hall went utterly still. Cersei's face changed first, though only by a tightening around the mouth. Joffrey made an incredulous sound and turned to her. No. Ned kept reading the witness marks. Renly, Barristan Selmy, Grand Maester Pycelle, the King's seal, Robert's ragged hand. When he finished, Barristan stepped forward, drew his sword, and sank to one knee. The white cloak spilled around him like milk. I witnessed the King's command. I stand by it. Renly followed, not with a sword, but with a courtier's grace that somehow felt no less binding. Yes, did I. Varys bowed. Littlefinger bowed. Pycelle, after the smallest hesitation Ned had ever seen on an old man, bowed too. All eyes went to Janos Slynt. The commander of the City Watch had the uncomfortable expression of a man asked to choose which of 2 cats would claw him less. He looked to Cersei, to Joffrey, to the white sword in Barristan's hand, to Renly's men by the door, to Ned standing unbent despite the cane and the pain. At last, Slynt dropped to one knee. The Watch obeys the King, and the King's command. Joffrey wheeled on him. I am the King. You are, Ned said before Slynt could answer. And I am your Lord Regent until your majority, by your father's own will. The realm will mourn for 7 days. No crown will be set upon your head before then. Until the mourning is ended, no command touching the peace of the city, the treasury, the watch, or the household shall be issued except through me. No, the boy's face flushed dark. You dare. Barristan rose in one smooth motion and sheathed his sword with a hard metallic whisper. His lordship dares exactly what the late king commanded. Cersei laid a hand on Joffrey's arm before he could speak again. You are grieving, she murmured, not looking at him at all. Her eyes stayed on Ned. We all are. A mother remains near her son in such a time, Lord Stark. A mother may, Ned said. A queen dowager may also remember that the realm has lost a king and the boy a father. I mean to keep him from flatterers and fearmongers alike. Do you include me among them? If need be? For a heartbeat he thought she might call the guards, or that Joffrey might do something stupid enough to start the bloodshed Renly had feared. Sandor's scarred mouth twitched as if the same thought pleased him. But Cersei mastered herself too quickly for that. My son is king, she said. You may play nursemaid a little while if the dead man's seal gives you pleasure, but do not mistake parchment for power. Ned met her stare. Do not mistake a boy's title for license. He turned then to the assembled men and let his voice fill the hall. The king is dead. The bells will toll until noon. The city gates are to remain open by day and shut by night. No man is to bear drawn steel in the streets without warrant. The royal apartments are to be guarded by the King's Guard, and men of the city watch under Lord Slint's command, who will answer to me. All ravens leaving the Red Keep for the next 7 days are to pass through the hand of the Lord Protector. Noi! Pycelle made a soft, strangled sound. Littlefinger's eyes gleamed. Cersei understood at once what that last meant. Her voice went very quiet. You would put the Queen Mother under watch? Ned did not soften it. I would put the Red Keep under order. Joffrey stepped forward again, reckless now. I'll have your head on a spike, Stark. And there it was, the thing Robert had feared. Not the crown, not the claim, but the boy himself. Too quick to threaten, too young to hide, too much his mother's son, and too little his putative father's. Ned answered with the chill he reserved for the North in him. You will speak to me with courtesy, your grace, or you will spend your morning in lessons with your Septon and Sir Barristan both. Even Renly's lips twitched at that. Joffrey looked around as if seeking someone to laugh with him and found no one at all. That, more than the will, more than Barristan's sword, more than Janos Slint's kneeling, told Ned he had won the morning. Not the war. Perhaps not even the day. But the morning, at least, was his. Outside, the bells went on tolling over King's Landing, and every peal seemed to say the same thing in a language of bronze. A king is dead. A boy is crowned in name, and wolves and lions have begun to measure each other in earnest. By afternoon, the Red Keep had become a cage in which everyone insisted he held the key. The bells were silent at last. The city below had taken up the burden with its own noise. Morning prayers at the septs, shouted rumors in the wine sinks, hawkers crying stale bread beside gossip fresh as blood. The long hum of a place that sensed power changing hands and wished to be first to profit by it. Ned went to the Queen's apartments before the light failed, taking Barristan with him and only one Stark guard beyond. He wanted no show of force. Shows of force led men to choose whether to answer them. Better that Cersei be made to feel the bars by inches. Her solar was warm and over-perfumed, bright with crimson hangings and gilded furniture, with lion work everywhere from the carved chair legs to the embroidery on the cushions. The windows looked west. Cersei had chosen her seat where the evening sun struck her hair and made a crown of it. Joffrey paced before the hearth like a chained hound. Myrcella sat near her mother with a book unopened in her lap. Tommen clutched a little carved stag and worried one antler smooth with his thumb. Sandor Clegane stood at the door. He inclined his head to Ned no more than courtesy demanded. The hound's burned flesh seemed harsher in firelight, a map of old agony never allowed to fade. Ned had seen too much to confuse ugliness with villainy and beauty with innocence. Yet in this room the difference between those things seemed almost a jest. Cersei did not bid him sit. Neither did he ask. You move quickly for a man who limps, she said. A man who limps learns to value speed where he can find it. Joffrey stopped pacing. When am I to be crowned? When the morning is complete. I am king now. You are. Yet you are not a man grown, and your father named me to govern until you are. My father was drunk. Barristan's face did not change, but Ned heard the slight shift of mailed weight beside him. Your father signed with clear intent before witnesses, Ned said. Mind how you speak of him. Cersei set a hand lightly on her son's sleeve. You see what he does. He means to strip the crown from you by inches, one polite phrase at a time. I mean to preserve the realm from haste, Ned said. And perhaps the realm from some in this room. Myrcella looked up at that, frightened enough to turn the color from her face. Tommen shrank closer to his mother. Joffrey only flushed. Out, Cersei said to the children. No, stay. Let them hear it. Let them hear how honor sounds when it puts on a gaoler's keys. Ned ignored the sneer. No raven leaves your chambers without my leave. No armed Lannister men enter the king's rooms. The king's guard will watch over Joffrey and his siblings. You may visit the king when and as I permit. The king is my son. The king is a boy. Boys are prey to those who think themselves wiser. Nay. Her green eyes brightened with sudden fury. Do not dress this theft in care. You think you can keep him in hand long enough to decide whether you prefer Stannis or some other puppet. That is all. Ned watched her closely. You name Stannis very readily. Something flashed in her face and was gone. Shall I name Renly instead? Or the dead man's old friend who cannot tell mercy from weakness? At that, Joffrey stepped close enough that Barristan shifted again. My mother says you're afraid of what I'll become. Ned looked down at the boy who called himself king. No, I am afraid of what men like you become when no one ever says no. Joffrey's hand flew out and slapped Tommen when the younger boy whimpered. Tommen cried out in pain and surprise. Myrcella rose at once and gathered him close. Cersei's jaw clenched, but she did not rebuke Joffrey. That omission chilled Ned more than the blow itself. Sandor laughed once under his breath. It was not a pleasant sound. Your Grace, Barristan said. That is enough. Joffrey wheeled on him. You serve me. I serve the crown, Barristan answered. If you would wear it worthily, begin now. The boy stared, startled that anyone in white armor might speak to him thus. Ned thought then that Robert had failed more thoroughly than even his enemies knew. A kingdom could survive a lazy king, a lustful king, a drunken king. It might not survive a king taught from birth that wanting and deserving were the same. He turned back to Cersei. I gave you the chance to leave with them. She smiled with no warmth. And I refused. Do you feel noble for repeating it? Nay. No. I feel tired. Then rest, while you can. Her gaze slid past him to the darkening windows. My father has not forgotten how to answer insults. Jaime has not forgotten how to kill men in armor. You have one piece of parchment, a pious old knight, and a brother who would steal his own blood's inheritance if you asked prettily enough. Ned's voice roughened. Robert named me. Whatever you think of me, do not make the mistake of thinking the realm will ignore the will of its dead king because you sneer at it. Nay. The realm ignores what suits it. Then I will remind it. When he turned to go, Myrcella spoke for the first time. Lord Stark. He paused. Her voice was small, but steady. Will someone tell us what will happen? It was the most terrible question in the room, because it came from the only one there who had not earned terror by deed or desire. Ned looked at the girl with her mother's beauty in gentler form, and at Tommen with tears still wet on his lashes, and he felt again the old useless ache of a good man in a world that made goodness pay for every breath. Yes, he said, when I know it. Outside the chambers, Sansa waited in the passage with Septa Mordain, just where he had told her not to be. She came at once, skirts whispering over the floor. Father, please, may I see Joffrey? They say he is grieving. Me. So are we all. Then why am I kept from him? Arya stood farther back with her arms folded and gave Ned a look that said she knew the answer and judged Sansa witless for not knowing it. Syrio leaned against the wall near her, expression unreadable. Sansa, Ned said carefully, it is not the time. Her eyes filled. You mean to keep me from him because of something in court? Everyone is whispering. Jane says the Queen is furious. Joffrey will think I've abandoned him. Let him think of his father. She drew back as if struck. That is cruel. Perhaps it was. The South had made him cruel in ways he had once believed belonged only to other men. He took her hand, but she let it lie in his without returning the pressure. Trust me, he said. I do, she answered, and the sorrow in her made him wish she had spoken false. Arya said nothing until they were halfway back to the Tower of the Hand. Then she asked, do you trust the Hound? Should I? I don't know. He looked like he wanted to laugh when Joffrey spoke. Ned let that thought rest in him. In King's Landing, contempt was sometimes safer than loyalty, and sometimes deadlier. There would be no easy measure of men now. Not that there ever had been. A regency, Ned discovered before a single day had fully passed, was less a crown than an endless table. The small council chamber filled before sunrise and seemed never to empty after. Ledgers appeared. Petitions multiplied. Men who had been content to nod to Robert while he hunted now wanted signatures, judgments, grain allocations, troop counts, harbor watches, debts answered, licenses renewed, disputes settled, appointments made, pardons denied, taxes postponed, taxes collected. Every scrap of order in the realm seemed to have been waiting for the king's death to demand proof it could still exist. Ned sat at the head of the table because Robert had named him there, though his leg pulsed and his patience wore thin by the hour. The place on his right where the king had sometimes sprawled remained empty. That emptiness governed the room more sternly than Robert ever had. Pycelle brought a list of mourning observances, half of them drawn from precedent, half from his own love of ceremony. Varys brought reports from the city, the street of flour full of whispers, the fishmongers square thick with argument, the goldsmiths already hammering small stags into lockets men might wear to show their grief as cheaply as possible. Littlefinger brought numbers that stank worse than Robert's wound had. The crown owed vast sums in every direction, and much of it to Casterly Rock. Renly brought impatience dressed as counsel. Crown the boy now, Pycelle urged for the third time. Stability is the realm's first need. Stability is not haste, Ned said. It is visible continuity, the old man countered. The people must see the line unbroken. They have seen the will. Pycelle spread his hands. The will names you protector, yes, but the crown upon the boy's brow would quiet fears. Would it? Renly said. Or would it give Cersei a living banner to raise over every man she can bribe? Pycelle blinked hurt innocence. No one speaks of the Queen Dowager raising banners. Everyone in the room knew that everyone in the room spoke of little else. Littlefinger toyed with a gold dragon between two fingers. If we are discussing banners, the Red Lion in the West may soon ask why the late King's grace is answered with shackles for his daughter. A little pageantry might soothe old Lord Tywin's temper. Nothing soothes Lord Tywin's temper, Varys murmured. It merely chooses for him the manner of his offense. Ned let them talk until the talk began circling like crows over a corpse. Then he turned to the most frightened man in the room. Lancel Lannister stood at the far end between two guards with his face washed but not his fear. He had changed clothes, yet there was still a dark stain under one thumbnail that no scrubbing had found. When Ned's eyes fixed on him, he swallowed hard enough to make his throat bob. You were with the king on the hunt, Ned said. Tell us exactly what happened. Lancel looked to Pycelle, then to the empty chair, then down at his own shoes. His grace hunted all day. He drank. There was a boar in the brush. The dogs turned it late. The king charged. The boar turned. That is all. You poured the wine. Yes, my lord. At whose command? Lancel's silence answered before his mouth did. My lord, he asked for it. How often? Often. More often than usual. A bead of sweat ran from his temple. He was in good spirits. Renly snorted. So much so, he could scarcely sit the saddle, if what came back with you is any measure. Pycelle shifted. Surely we do not mean to make accusation out of strong wine at a hunt. Ned kept his gaze on Lancel. Did the queen speak with you before the hunt? The boy's head jerked up, panic raw on his face. That was answer enough for every man at the table. Littlefinger's smile sharpened. Varys lowered his lids. Renly leaned back as if he had expected no better of lions. Lancel licked dry lips. Her grace said only that his grace should be kept in good humor. And wine keeps men merry? Ned asked. It can. It can also make them slow. Pycelle lifted a placating hand. My lord protector, grief tempts men towards suspicion. We must be careful not to stain the queen's honor on the word of a shaken boy. Cersei's honor. Ned nearly laughed. Instead he said, the boy will remain under watch. Lancel looked as if he might faint. My lord, Please, you served the king his last cups. Until I judge whether you serve more than wine, you do not leave the Red Keep. None. Da-da. The guards led him away. Renly drummed his fingers on the table. There. The queen's first thread. Pull harder and perhaps the whole embroidery comes down. Ned ignored the image. All ravens from the royal apartments remain subject to review. The gates are to be doubled at sundown. Lord Slint will rotate men on the walls in pairs drawn from separate captains. I want no single pocket of loyalty holding a post alone. Littlefinger gave an approving little nod. Paranoia becomes you. Wear it more often. Call it caution. As you like. Ned turned to Barristan, who had come at his summons and now stood by the wall like an old white tower of his own. You will oversee the king's household guard personally. Sir Meryn and Sir Boros may attend his grace in turns, but no man enters without your knowledge. Barristan bowed. It will be done. His grace, Pycelle said carefully, meaning Joffrey. Not the dead man everyone still heard when the title was spoken. Should not feel himself a prisoner. No, Ned said. He should feel himself watched over in grief. Words, Littlefinger murmured. Such valuable cloth. You can cut almost any coat from them. Ned let that pass. He sent ravens to Storm's End and Highgarden confirming the regency. He sent another to Dragonstone, more urgent than the first. The king is dead. Come swiftly. He reaffirmed Beric Dondarrion's commission against Gregor Clegane. He ordered the portmasters to keep record of every ship that entered or left Blackwater Bay. He commanded the treasury sealed until its accounts could be properly known. He summoned the High Septon to attend upon the young king after the morning, partly for ceremony and partly to place a pious eye in rooms he did not trust. By midday, his head rang with numbers and names. By dusk, the room had emptied at last, leaving only Varys, who lingered as if smoke had taken human form. You tread a narrow road, the eunuch said. I know. Do you? The queen cannot forgive this. Lord Tywin cannot ignore it. Renly will support you only until support for you threatens support for himself. Pettier supports whatever makes the next day noisier than the last. Varys folded his hands into his sleeves. The realm is grateful to a firm regent for about as long as it takes to find a more convenient one. Ned rubbed at his brow. And you? I support peace, Varys said softly. Then support it loudly. Varys smiled. Peace seldom comes to loud men. When he had gone, Ned sat alone with the ledgers and listened to the castle breathe. Somewhere in the corridors a child laughed and was hushed. Somewhere else a sword rang on a whetstone. He thought of the north, where rule was meat, weather, harvest, justice done face to face. Here rule was paper and posture and men lying in silk. Yet paper and posture had held the morning. For one more day, perhaps they could hold the realm. The Red Keep had never belonged to children, yet children found its truths faster than courtiers did. Arya learned that on the second night after Robert's death, when Syrio set her to moving without sound across the Tower of the Hand while the lamps were being lit below. He had taken to the task of keeping her near with a Braavosis sly obedience, which meant he kept her near enough to know where she was, and far enough that she still believed herself free. Arya respected that in him. Quiet feet, Syrio told her, tapping the side of her head with 2 fingers. Not only feet, quiet thoughts. If the cat wishes milk, the cook hears her. If the cat wishes silence, even the rats forget she has passed. No. Arya drew a face at him. I'm not a cat. No? He lifted a brow. Then what are you? A wolf. Then learn from the cats, little wolf. She did. She moved through the passages outside the chambers with needle hidden at her back beneath a plain cloak. Men had been everywhere since the king died. Men in mail and silk and white cloaks and gold cloaks. Men who thought children looked and saw nothing. Arya disliked them for that. She heard the old maester before she saw him. Pycelle's chains whispered like tiny bells against his robe. a sound she had learned to recognize because old men who made that much noise rarely expected anyone smaller than they were to hear it. He came not by the main stair to the rookery, but by a narrower turning passage little used by anyone who was not a servant, moving slower than fear but faster than dignity. Arya flattened herself into the shadow of an alcove and watched him pass. He carried a folded parchment in one spotted hand and no lantern, which was strange enough. Stranger still, he looked behind him 3 times before mounting the stair. Arya waited 1 heartbeat. 2 then followed. At the head of the stair, the rookery opened dark and close around the smell of droppings, straw, and feathers. Ravens shifted in their cages with soft croaks that sounded disturbingly like muttered words. Pycelle stood with his back to her, bending over the table where the messages were sealed. A small candle burned there. In its flame, Arya saw the blob of wax on the folded parchment and the stamp that bit into it. A lion. Pycelle muttered to himself as he pressed the seal harder. For Lord Tywin. Fastest wings, no stops. Then he shuffled toward the cage rows. Arya did not think. Thinking was lower than fear. She darted forward, snatched the letter from the table, and slid behind a stack of baskets just as the maester turned back with a raven on his wrist. He froze. For 1 breath, Arya thought he had seen her. Then the bird flapped wildly. Pycelle cursed under his breath, and the old man gave all his attention to tying the message that was no longer in his hand. He stared stupidly at his empty fingers. Color drained from his face. No. Arya slipped away while he searched. By the time she reached Syrio, her heart hammered so hard she thought it might leap free. The Bravosi took 1 look at her face and 1 at the parchment in her fist and said only, "Ah, the little wolf has found meat." Ned broke the seal in his solar with Arya beside his chair and Syrio by the door. The old man's hand on the letter had been shaky. The message itself was hurried but plain enough. Robert dead. Joffrey king in name. Stark holds regency. Communication constrained. Send word. Send strength. Not every word was needed. The rest smelled of fear. Ned read it once, then again more slowly. "You stole this?" he asked. Arya bristled. "I took it from Pycelle because he was sneaking." Syrio smiled without showing teeth. She observed, then she acted. That she did. Ned folded the parchment carefully. There was pride in him, and dread wrapped around it like briar. "You did well." Arya straightened, pleased. "I know." He almost laughed. Instead, he kissed the top of her head and sent her back under Sirio's watch. When she had gone, he sat with the letter a long time. Pycelle had now shown his hand as clearly as if he had drawn a sword in council. The old man would deny, protest confusion, blame grief, but denial changed nothing. Cersei's friends were already reaching west, and Lord Tywin would not need many such messages to understand that the wolf had 1 paw on the lion cubs. Before he could decide how hard to strike, another matter came to him in the form of Septa Mordane, flustered, scandalized, and carrying a scrap of lavender ribbon. Sansa stood behind her with her chin up and her eyes full of misery. "What is this?" Ned asked quietly. The Septa held out a folded note. "Found in the hand of a maid from the Queen's household, my lord. The girl says Lady Sansa begged her to carry it to the king." Sansa colored. "He's my betrothed." "Your king," Arya muttered from the doorway before Syrio drew her back out of sight again. Ned opened the note. It was full of sorrow and innocence and apologies for absence, assurances that she grieved with him, that she longed to comfort him, that her father did not understand. There was nothing in it to damn a kingdom, only enough to damn a girl's safety in a viper's nest. He set the parchment aside. "Sansa." She faced him as if awaiting sentence. "I only wanted him to know I had not turned against him." Ned's weariness came out as gentleness because anger would do no good. "Child, you do not know what storm you stand in. I know you keep me from him, and everyone whispers that something is wrong. Something is wrong. Then tell me." He looked at her and saw Catelyn in the set of her mouth. Saw the little girl who had once brought him winter roses from the glass garden, and believed songs were histories. How could he give her this Southron rot and not be cruel? How could he not? I cannot. Not yet. Tears spilled anyway. You never trust me. That is not so. It is. She ran then, before he could answer, and the septa hurried after her with scandal still fluttering uselessly around her like a torn banner. Ned stood alone between one daughter's stolen lion letter and another daughter's love note to a boy who threatened heads on spikes. Children found truths, yes. They also found wounds adults had forgotten how to guard. He summoned Barristan at once and ordered the Queen's household further reduced. Pycelle was confined to his chambers pending explanation and stripped, for the moment, of free use of the rookery. Messages would now pass through Maester Coleman's young assistant, a nervous man whom no faction had yet taught to lie well. The Queen would complain. Court would whisper. Let them. That night, as the castle lamps burned low and the rain returned, Arya asked him at supper whether wolves ever lived in cages. Not well, he said. She considered that, and nodded, as if it confirmed something she had suspected all along. King Robert lay in the great sept of Beeler with a warhammer by his side and a crown on a pillow at his feet. And for the first time since Ned had known him, the man was quiet enough to be mistaken for dignity. The sept had filled with the smell of incense and damp wool, and thousands of guttering candles. White stone rose high above in pale ribs that made men feel small whether they believed in the seven or not. Lining the approach were lordlings in black and household knights in muted mail, ladies veiled and solemn, septons intoning prayers for a king who had rarely listened to any prayer not answered by a wine cup. The city had come as close to silence as it ever would. Even the babies cried softly. Ned stood with his cane and his pain and his black mourning clothes at the head of the bier while the High Septon gave Robert back to the gods. Cersei knelt nearest the body, her face hidden behind a dark veil that made her seem more widow than serpent. Joffrey stood beside her, rigid with anger disguised as grief. Tommen stared wide-eyed at the dead man's beard. Myrcella wept honestly into a square of lace. Renly, dressed in black edged with green, looked older than he had 3 days before. Sir Loras Tyrell stood a little behind him, beautiful and hard as a sword made for show and war in equal measure. Barristan kept his watch in white and silence. When the last prayer faded, the High Septon turned to Ned. The crown must be shown the realm. Shown, not yet placed. Even here the wording mattered. They processed from septi to keep through streets lined with small folk forced to their knees by gold cloaks. Rain had washed the city and left it smelling of mud, fish, whetstone, dung, and grief. The Red Keep waited above it all, and red walls streaked darker by weather. In the throne room the court assembled again, fuller now, swelled by lords and ladies who had stayed wisely absent during the first hard morning, and now came to see whether the wolf truly held the stag's reins. Ned felt their eyes on his limp, on the cane, on the hollow under his cheek where weariness had begun to bite. Good. Let them see the cost. Men trusted power more when it looked burdened. At the foot of the Iron Throne, he stopped. The cushion bearing the crown was set beside him. Joffrey stared at it with naked hunger. Ned raised his voice. Robert of House Baratheon is dead. By his own hand and seal, witnessed before his passing, his son Joffrey of House Baratheon succeeds him as king. By the same will I am named Lord Protector of the realm and Regent until his grace comes of age. A stir went through the hall. Not surprise now, but recognition. Some knelt at once. Others knelt because others did. Titles became real when repeated often enough before witnesses. Joffrey stepped forward as though to claim the crown immediately. Ned put out one hand. Not today. The boy's nostrils flared. It is mine. It is, and it will wait. Ned turned so all could hear him. The crown will remain unplaced until the full rites of mourning are complete. In that time the realm's peace will be secured, the king instructed in the duties before him, and the circumstances of the late king's death properly examined. There it was, the blade hidden in the cloth. Cersei's head snapped slightly toward him beneath the veil. Murmurs rippled outward. Pycelle, restored to attendance but not trust. Looked as though he had swallowed vinegar. Varys watched with deep-lidded interest. Littlefinger smiled like a man at the theater who knows the best scene has not yet come. Joffrey forgot himself. "I need no instruction." "Every king does," Barristan said from behind him. No one in the room had expected that voice. The White Knight did not speak loudly. He did not need to. His authority had been hammered too long on battlefields and tourneys alike. Joffrey rounded on him, but Renly chose that moment to descend 2 steps from where he had been standing among the Baratheon kin and bow to Ned. "I acknowledge the king," Renly said, "and the will of my brother." One by one, others followed. Lord Giles coughed and knelt. Sir Kevin's place was empty, of course. Sir Loras knelt only after the smallest glance at Renly. Men from the Stormlands did so quickly. Men with Western ties were slower. None dared remain standing long enough to be remembered for it. Afterward, the hall loosened into its 1,000 small conversations. Courtiers swarmed like flies to honey and blood together. Sansa caught one glimpse of Joffrey across the room and seemed to forget every warning he had ever given her. She would have gone to him if Septim Mordain had not kept a grip like iron on her wrist. Arya, beside Syrio near a column, looked not at the king but at all the men who watched the king, which pleased Ned more than it should have. Renly found him before the first petitioners could. "You are very determined to make this difficult," he murmured. "Difficult and lawful are often kin." Renly's smile did not reach his eyes. "Lawful may yet put Stannis above the boy. If the law says so." Renly looked toward Joffrey, then toward Cersei. "And if the law puts Stannis above me, you ask as if I can answer another man's birth. I ask as a man who knows what sort of king my brother would be." Ned heard what lay beneath that. Not merely fear of Stannis, but desire. Renly wore charm as lightly as a cloak, yet ambition looked out of him now like a blade from a seam. "The realm does not always get the king it likes," Ned said. "No, it gets the king strong enough to take and keep the chair." Renly sighed. "You truly are my brother's friend and not mine." "I am friend to peace." Renly laughed softly. "Then you are lonelier than I thought." Loras approached then, bright as polished steel in morning silk, and said something low to Renly that made the younger Baratheon's mouth harden. They bowed and left together through the side doors, not furtively, but not so openly either, as men entirely content. Ned watched them go and knew the hall had just lost one uncertainty and gained another. As the court thinned, Cersei passed close enough that only he heard her speak through the veil. "You can hold him for a day," she said. "A week, perhaps a month, if every god is deaf. But boys grow teeth. Lord Stark and lions do not forget where their cubs are penned. You would do better to remember where you stand." She turned her face just enough that he saw one green eye through the lace. "On the edge of a knife, like everyone." She swept on. By the time night fell, Ned had the crown locked away under triple guard, and the knowledge that half the realm would call him dutiful for it, while the other half would call him grasping. Both halves would be wrong, and neither would care. That night the sea sent him an answer. Ned had gone to the silent chamber where Robert's body rested before burial in the vaults below the sept. The dead king lay beneath linen now, the face covered, the great hands crossed over the breast that had once seemed broad enough to block a gate. Candles burned at the corners of the bier. Barristan stood watch nearby, motionless enough to be taken for one more carved saint if not for the age in his eyes. For a while neither man spoke. The keep had gone hushed in the hours after ceremony, as castles sometimes do when even rumor needs rest. Rain ticked against the shutters. The wax ran slowly down the candlesticks. "Was he a good king?" Ned asked at last, surprised to hear the question in his own voice. Barristan considered a long time before answering. "He was a great warrior." "That is not the same." "No." The old knight's gaze stayed on the shrouded body. "He could be generous. He could be brave. He was not patient with the machinery of rule. Men mistook the one for the other because they loved him." Ned nodded. It was near enough the truth to hurt. A knock sounded at the outer door. Tamard entered, bowed, and said, "A man from Dragonstone, my lord. Came by skiff in the rain. Says he bears a letter for your hand alone." Ned did not need to be told who that would be. Davos Seaworth looked more fisherman than lord when they brought him in, though the years had laid a kind of weathered authority on him. His beard was wet with rain. Salt had dried white on his dark cloak. One hand bore shortened fingers where Stannis had once punished smuggling and rewarded loyalty in a single gesture. He went to one knee without flourish. "Lord Stark." "Rise, Sir Davos." Ned took the leather tube from him. The seal was black wax, stamped with the crowned stag of Dragonstone. "You came quickly." My lord commanded haste. He thought it best not to trust ravens alone. Ned broke the seal. The letter was Stannis through and through. Plain, severe, without wasted courtesy. "Robert dead. The line of succession falls to me by law. Jon Arryn and I learned the truth of Queen Cersei's children before his murder. Search the book on great houses and compare every Baratheon marriage. Black of hair, black of seed. The boy Joffrey is no brother's son to me. I will come if the city may be trusted not to close its jaws around me. Secure the queen and her issue. Hold the realm and the dead king's peace until I claim what is mine." Ned read it twice. No man in Westeros wrote with less ornament. The words might have been carved with a chisel. When he looked up, Davos' weathered face gave nothing away, but not from craft. The man was made of loyalty too plain to masquerade as anything else. "My lord believes you honorable," Davos said. "Else he would not have sent me. Honor is a hard coin in this city." "Aye." Davos' mouth twitched. "That is why he sent me by boat and not to the front gate." Barristan had not moved during the reading, but now he said, "Stannis is Robert's true heir, if what is alleged is proven." Davos glanced at him with respect. "It is proven, sir. My lord would not write it else." Ned folded the letter slowly. "Proven to me, perhaps. Not yet to the realm." "Then prove it," Davos said simply. It was the simplicity that made the thing feel impossible. In the north, a claim could be settled by witness, law, memory, sword if need be. Here, every truth wore another man's livery before it reached the street. Joffrey had been acclaimed already in name. Cersei still had friends at court and blood in the west. Renly had charm enough to raise banners on a smile. Stannis had law and iron and little else. The realm might owe him obedience and yet refuse him gladly. Davos seemed to read something of that from Ned's silence. "My lord is not beloved." No. He knows it. Does he know what that means? Davos did not smile. He knows what duty means. Behind them, the candle flame bent in a draft and righted itself. Ned thought of Robert's will, of Joffrey's insolent mouth, of Cersei beneath the heart tree saying he was late, of Sansa's tears and Arya's stolen letter, of the children who would pay for every choice made by adults before they ever understood the game. He thought too of Jon Arryn dying with the truth in his throat, and Robert with a boar's tusk in his belly, because a queen had decided drunkenness was as good as murder. "What does your lord ask of me now?" Ned said. "Hold the city. Keep the queen from fleeing. Keep the boy from being crowned, in fact as well as in name. Send word when he may come safe." Nice. Safe. No man like Stannis came safe into King's Landing, not if the city had a choice in the matter. Yet safety was not the same as necessity. Renly came to Ned's solar before midnight, perhaps guessing already what the sea had brought. Laura stood just behind him in a dark cloak. Candlelight gave the Tyrell night gold at the edges, like a man lit from within. "Davos arrived," Renly said at once. He did. And Stannis writes of law, no doubt. He always does. "Nah, D. Cabin." He writes of claim. Renly laughed once, joyless. "Oh, of course he does." Well, there it is. The realm may have a choice between a blonde boy raised by Cersei, a humorless rock on Dragonstone, and me. Tell me, Ned, which do you think men would rather follow? Men follow many things for many reasons. Do not answer me like a maester. I will answer you like your brother's regent. If the children are false-born, Stannis is heir. Renly's face lost all pretense then. And if crowning Stannis sets the realm afire, it may burn whatever we do. Then choose a flame that can be mastered. Loras shifted but said nothing. The silence of the young knight was more eloquent than many speeches. He had clearly not come merely as a companion. Ned met Renly's gaze and saw in it charm turned hard, grievance sharpened by long years under older brothers, and the fear of being asked to kneel to Stannis all his life. "You are not heir while Stannis lives," Ned said. "No." Renly's voice cooled. "But heirs are not always the men who end up sitting high." With that he bowed, all court again, and withdrew. Ned watched the door close behind him and knew the wind had shifted once more. "Will he flee?" Barristan asked when they were alone again. "Not flee," Ned said. "Move." The old knight nodded. He understood the difference. Before dawn, Ned wrote again, this time to Stannis in his own hand. "Come," he wrote. "Come with haste and caution both. Bring what proof you have. Until then, I hold the king's peace. The children are under guard. The queen is watched. The crown remains unplaced." He did not add that every hour seemed to breed one more man who believed the peace should belong to him instead. At dawn, Ned convened the council again and laid Stannis' letter on the table between the candles. No one touched it at first. Renly's chair stood empty. That told its own tale before a word was said. Sir Loras was absent as well. Varys noticed everything and betrayed that by noticing this with particular stillness. Littlefinger lifted one brow. Pycelle's mouth sagged open like an old purse. Barristan stood behind Ned's chair, a white shadow of judgment. "Lord Renly has departed the city," Varys murmured. "For Storm's End?" Ned asked. "Or farther," said Littlefinger. "When men ride from hard truths, they prefer gardens to garrisons." Ned let that pass. He unfolded Stannis' letter and read enough aloud to empty the room of any last comfortable lie. Not every line. There was no need to wring spectacle from it. Only the core. Jon Arryn had discovered the incest of Queen and Kingslayer. Robert's children by Cersei were not Robert's children. By law, the crown passed to Stannis Baratheon. Pycelle all but jumped from his seat. "This is monstrous slander." "It may also be truth," Barristan said. The old maester spluttered. "Sir, we cannot condemn a queen on suspicion and a dead man's studies." Ned fixed him with a flat look. "You mean the studies Jon Arryn pursued before he died? The studies you assisted?" Pycelle went ashen. Varys glanced down. Littlefinger smiled faintly, like a man warming his hands at a blaze not yet large enough to threaten him. "What will you do?" Petyr asked. That was the question, the only one. The Regency had given Ned the room to ask it, nothing more. Robert's will had placed the kingdom in his hands, but not gently and not without contradiction. Joffrey had been proclaimed. Stannis had a better claim. Cersei had motive for murder. Tywin had armies. Renly had vanished to gather whatever men beauty and charm and Loras Tyrell might purchase. The realm would not wait for perfect certainty. Realms never did. Ned rose. "The Queen Dowager will be confined to her apartments under guard," he said. "The king and his siblings will be removed to the Maiden Vault under the protection of the Kingsguard and Sir Barristan's direct command. No message leaves them unsanctioned. Lord Stannis is summoned to court to present his claim before the Lords of the Realm and the High Septon." Pycelle made a distressed sound. "My lord, to remove his grace from his mother, to remove the boy king from faction," Ned said. "Until the truth is heard in full, I hold the dead king's peace. That is my charge." Littlefinger tapped a finger near Stannis' letter. "And if Cersei resists? Then she resists the king's will and the regency established by it." Varys' voice floated soft as silk. "And Lord Tywin?" Ned looked at the intercepted lion-sealed message lying near his hand, then at the raven just arrived from the west with no words yet opened. Lord Tywin will do what pride instructs him to do. So must I." The orders went out before noon. Cersei did resist, though with words first. The guards heard her voice ring down the passage long before they opened her doors. Joffrey resisted with shouting and a thrown goblet that burst red against the wall beside Barristan's head. Tommen cried. Myrcella clung to her brother's hand. Sandor Clegane stood near the hearth with the expression of a man who had long ago decided noble blood changed nothing essential in children except the cost of their clothes. When Barristan informed the Queen that the king would be instructed elsewhere for his own safety, she laughed in his face. "You old fool, do you know what you make yourself when you help him?" Barristan's answer was grave and merciless. A knight keeping faith with his king. "Which king?" she snapped. "The lawful one," he said. And that was as close to judgment as the old man ever came. Ned entered before the quarrel could turn uglier. The children had been gathered already. Joffrey fought the hands that tried to guide him until Sandor caught him by the shoulder and held him still with one massive scarred hand. "Save your strength, boy," the hound said. "You'll need it." The prince, king, perhaps bastard, perhaps both, stared up at him in disbelief. No one had spoken so to him in years. Cersei turned on Ned. "If you do this, there is no mending it." There was no mending it when Jon Arryn died. Her face went white, then hard. "You think yourself righteous because you come late with truths and cling to forms. Men like you are the easiest to break. You cannot do what must be done when mercy stays your hand." He looked at her then, not as queen, not as widow, not as beautiful danger, but as the woman who had chosen every step that led here and would choose war over yielding another. "Perhaps," he said, "but I can do what is just. Justice." She spat the word as though it tasted weak. "Have your justice, then. I will have the rest." The children were led away. Myrcella looked back once, stricken. Tommen stumbled and was steadied. Joffrey said he would remember all their faces. Sandor went with him because someone had to, and the scarred man's expression suggested the work amused him less than it wearied him. When the doors shut, Cersei stood alone in a room designed to flatter queens, and for the first time since Ned had known her, she looked caged rather than enthroned. It did not soften him. Far to the west, in halls carved from stone the color of old gold, Tywin Lannister read a raven brought at a run and let the page fall into the fire without comment. Kevin stood nearby. Adam Marbrand had been sent for. Men waited in the corridor beyond with questions they did not yet dare voice. "What word?" Kevin asked at last. Tywin's face might have been carved from the same rock as the keep around him. "Robert is dead. Stark holds the boy. Cersei is constrained. Stannis makes claim. And Joffrey, proclaimed, not crowned." Kevin exhaled slowly. "Then there is time." Tywin turned his gaze toward the darkening window where the sea beat far below the cliffs. "There is insult," he said. "Time is only what insult uses before it puts on armor." He ordered the banners called before the hour was out. In King's Landing, ravens rose black against a white noon sky from the rookery of the Red Keep. One for Dragonstone, one for Winterfell, one for River Run, one for Answered or No, one for the Vale whether Lysa answered or no, one for the Stormlands, one for every lord whose sword one for every lord whose sword might matter. Ned watched them wheel and vanish over the city and understood at last that Regency was not holding a kingdom steady. It was standing in the center of its first fracture and choosing where the split must run. Below him, the Iron Throne waited with its 1,000 edges. Above him, the bells of the city began again, slower now, less for grief than warning. Robert had given him a realm with a dead king, a living boy, a hidden truth, and enemies in every direction. He had taken it because duty left him no honorable refusal. Now duty had become the sharpest thing in the room, and it wore his face.